What's up everybody? Today we're taking a look at lithium-ion battery packs for your FPV. I often get the question of what kind of packs are you using, what kind of cells, all of that great stuff, and that's exactly what we're going to answer here today. So if you're wondering what cells are the best, which one should I use, should I get 18650 or 21700, what about the capacity, what about the constant amp output, how can I make a better informed decision so that I can make my own packs, we're going to get right into it right now. So right off the bat, you can see I got a good variety of lithium-ion packs here. Some of these are 4S, some of these are 6S, most of these are 1P, and I have one 2P here that I've really been enjoying for extra long-range flying. Now, most of these are 21700s because that's what I've gone towards, but I do have some 18650 packs here for my 6S. So we're going to compare these side by side and take a look at what might be the best option for you. Now, quick crash course, if you're not familiar what the difference is between an 18650 or a 21700, they're both lithium-ion. Really, it's just the size here. So let me come in a little bit closer. So if we look at these side by side, this is an 18650, this is a 21700 pack. These are both 6S. Okay, so an 18650 is 18 millimeters across the top and lengthwise 65 millimeters. 21700, 21 millimeters across the top, 70 millimeters in length. So width, right, the 21700 is going to be a little bit bigger, and lengthwise, let me just kind of stack these on top of it, yeah, it's just a little bit longer as well. So it consumes more real estate. That may or may not be an issue depending on what size of a quad that you're flying, okay? So if you're on a 7-inch, usually the battery tray is pretty big. On a 5-inch, not as much. So maybe you're going to be flying something like an 18650 pack versus a 21700, or once you start to get into something much larger like a 2P pack, right, you might not have the space. I do like having my packs separated into individual 1P packs, so I have a little bit of modularity. So I've got these two 18650s, right? I can fly them individually, or if I want to combine them together with a parallel connector, I can do that. Or I could actually potentially mix and match my 21700s and my 18650s, which is not an issue because they are the same voltage, right? And they'll just share the capacity. We're going to get in that here in just a minute. But comparatively, if we look at these other ones that I have over here, this is just a 4S battery. We've got 4 versus 6. This is a 21700s. That's all I have for my 4S packs here, and I fly this on my 5-inch. So when it comes down to weight and stuff, let me see, because I always write it down here. So 305 grams for a 21700 4S pack. And what is this, 258? I can't read, it's kind of coming loose. Where's the weight on that? Oh, 313 grams. So they're almost the same weight in the sense of a 4S versus a 6S, okay? So let's talk about some of the stats and things to consider when it comes to different battery packs. So if you're to ask me what's the most important when it comes to choosing a cell, is it gonna be the cell size, 18650 versus 21700? Is it gonna be the capacity of the cell? Does it hold 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 milliamps? Is that important? Or is it going to be what is its rated output power? So how many amps constant can you pull on this cell without damaging it or having it just die and blow up in flames, right? So that's actually the answer. When it comes to a cell, how many amps can it constantly put out as rated by the manufacturer before something terrible happens? It overheats, it blows up, it dies, it drops out of the sky, that type of stuff, okay? So I would not recommend buying anything under 30 amps constant. Okay, that would be the bare minimum. Now, if we look at this, we've got the Samsung 40T. This is rated at 35 amps. Great. If we look at the Molicell P42, this is rated at 45 amps constant output. So this is usually my go-to cell, not only for 21700s, but for the 18650s, yes? But that's if you're just running a single pack, a 6S 1P or a 4S 1P, okay? If we start to combine the two together, okay, this wouldn't be a good match, but let's just say these two over here, for example, okay? Because these are both rated at 40 amps each, okay? This is the Molicell P28B, which is an 18650. Okay, it's rated at 40 amps each. But if I put these two in together in parallel, right now it's a 6S 2P pack. Now the pack as a whole not only doubles in its capacity, but it also doubles the amount of constant amp output, which is now 80 amps, which is great because now we've got a higher buffer. Now you're gonna say like, well, how many amps does my drone constantly pull? That's a good question that takes flight testing and paying attention to your metrics that are on the screen when you're flying, okay? Typically when I fly with just a single pack, especially with 18650s on a 7-inch quad, I'm pulling somewhere between 10 to 15 amps constant as I'm flying under half throttle. If I put a 21700 on there, it's a little bit heavier, so the drone's gonna have to work a little bit harder. When I fly this 6S2P right here, this thing is heavy. This is, I don't even know how many, right? This is like 800 or 900 grams right here. This thing is a brick, okay? I am constantly pulling somewhere between 20 to 25 amps for 2 packs, for a 2P right here. If I'm flying into a headwind, that goes up to 35 to 40. Now that sounds scary, but remember, because this is a 6S2P, I actually have 90 amps available, so I'm really only pulling half of what its capability is because it's such a large cell. Now, if I was pulling 40 or 45 amps, with just one of these packs right here, I might get a little bit concerned. So those are things to consider when you're flying. Am I flying on an average day? Am I flying in the wind when it's super crappy and I know there's gonna be a headwind on the way out, or more importantly on the way in? That's when it gets scary. Do I have enough amps to push through without stressing the cell out too much? Now we're gonna look at some of the discharge charts here in just a second because that's really important and that's something that's often overlooked. Now I kind of grew up building batteries for electric skateboards and e-bikes. So we make huge packs like a 10S or a 12S, which is 36 and 48 volts respectively. And normally there's at least 4 in parallel. Like so you make a 12S 4P or a 12S 6P, or my biggest e-skate, which it looks like right here, this is a 12S 8P. This is a range monster. But because we're flying a small drone, we don't have the ability to fly with huge packs, and a bigger pack with more in parallel may not actually give you more range in a trade-off for the weight. So what do we need to look at? We need to look at the discharge characteristics, because even though this cell, what is a Samsung 42, which is rated at 4 amp hours, right? It's rated at a capacity of 4,000 milliamps or 4 amp hours if you discharge it based on the discharge charts. Like, tested in ideal settings, it's only discharged at half an amp the entire time, and they get all the juice out of this, okay? So we need to think about, what does the discharge chart look like when you fly your drone? How many amps is it constantly pulling? And we're gonna be able to see where that falls off. Are you gonna fly these packs all the way from 4.2 down to 2.8? Or are you gonna stop at 3.0, right? That's all the different stuff that you're gonna wanna factor in, and we're gonna look at that right now. So into the computer we go. We're gonna take a look at some of the cells that are online, readily available, see what they're using. Maybe we'll take a look at what their discharge specs are if they provide it, okay? So if we come over here to get FPV, yeah, and we can look at these ones by Luminaire, they're nav batteries here. And I was looking at these earlier. So it's a 3,000 milliamp 6S battery, but it doesn't really matter if it's a 6S or a 4S. Okay, these are an 18650, and these are their, I guess they're white label. They're wrapping their own types of batteries, so we don't really know what kind of cell it is. I don't like that. I like knowing that I'm buying a Samsung or a Molicell or something, okay? But according to them, we do have some rate discharge specs and characteristics here, okay? So most cells will come with something that looks like this. Yes, we can see what the voltage is over here. They're assuming that you might get that battery charged up to 4 volts instead of 4.2. Yeah, and then as you start to discharge, yes, you obviously can see what how much capacity we got out of this battery through the life cycle, okay? So what we're looking at here, we have 3 different lines, and each one represents a different discharge rate. 10 amps constant, 20 amps constant, 30 amps constant, okay? And then they're giving you an average up here. So they do have a chart up here, but I'm always gonna go with a higher number than a lower number so that I have a little bit of a buffer, right? So if I know that when I'm flying a single pack, a 1S, and I'm pulling 10 to 15, I'm probably gonna assume that I'm gonna be pulling 20 amps heading into the wind, and I would never be pulling 20 amps constant unless I'm trying to fly faster. But at a nice average flight, nice average camera angle, yes, okay, 20 amps sounds good. So if we do 20 amps, that means that's the yellow line right here, okay? And right around here, so if we discharge it all the way down to 2.5, which is super low, which is scary for me as well, you're gonna get somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 milliamps, okay? So you're getting probably like 2,750. But I like to land right around 3 volts or so, or start flying back around 3. So let's just say when the shit hits the fan, at 3 volts, at 20 amps, you can see the lines right up here. Right here, I've only gotten about 2,200 milliamps out of this. They're selling it as a 3,000 milliamp pack. But if I only fly down to 3 volts because I want to have some extra buffer, yes, then I'm really only getting 2200 milliamps out of this pack, okay? And you're gonna notice that with some of the cells, once they start to get below 3 volts, they drop off real fast. And that is scary, okay? You don't wanna be in that position. But they also have a quick chart up here. And you can look at this and you can see what their average is. Yes, if you're doing 20 amps constant, yeah, the capacity ratio, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, you're getting like 3200 volt capacity right here. Here it is, 2800. Yeah, right. Okay, I don't believe that. At 30 amps, okay, constantly pulling this green line right here. If I'm trying to come back in right around 3 volts, I'm only getting 2000. So I'm getting 2/3 of what I should be getting. Let's move on to something else. But let's look at the dark energy, right? We've got these ones over here. This is a 21700, 4200 milliamps. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a Molicell P42, which we've already talked about before, but let's just see if they're gonna tell us right here. Yep, so you can see right here, Molicell P42A, which is great. They might not have a discharge chart here, but we're gonna take a look at that here shortly. Now we'll hop over to 18650 Battery Store. This is where I typically buy all of my cells. Highly recommend, 10 out of 10, would do again. Okay, so we're gonna look at some of the cells. Let's look at some of the 18650s first. Okay, and you can come through and you can scroll and you can always make this really easy for yourself. Okay, if you just wanna do your discharge current amps, remember I said nothing less than 30 in my opinion, so we can turn that up, and there's not a lot of high discharge cells typically. So we've got the Molicell P28A, yeah, 2800 milliamps, 35 amps constant. You've got a P26A over here, 2600 milliamps, 35 amps constant. Okay, this one actually costs a little bit more, yes, and you're getting less capacity. So I would lean towards this P28A, but I might compare them side by side just to see what the deal is. The Molicell P28Bs, okay, 2800 milliamps and 40 amps output. However, and I've bought these ones, and if I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't. Okay, this is $8 per cell, okay, compared to the Molicell P28A, okay, in the same line. Yeah, 35 amps, 40 amps. Is it really worth, okay, $455, is it really worth another $3.50 per cell to get an extra 5 amps of output and an extra zero, an extra zero, 2800 milliamps? No, you could do the math on that one and do the division and you can see, not a good buy, okay? But we're gonna look at these discharge rates, okay? Because I fly these P28Bs right here. So if we come over here, we can scroll down and you can see there's a discharge chart right here. I don't think it's gonna open. I'm gonna try and zoom in. Hopefully it's not too pixelated, okay? I know that when I fly these cells, that once they start to hit around 3.15 volts, they start to drop off pretty quick. Yeah, and that's still only flying at 10 to 15 amps roughly, okay? So I start to bring it in. So this one's a little bit nicer. Right? We've got a bunch of different lines right here. Like I said, probably 20 to 30 is a good number to follow in that line. Okay, so if I follow the black line, which is 20 amps, okay, and I'm pulling constantly from here, and I like to pull in, right, I said right around 3 is where I'm coming in, okay, is where I want to start to land or think about coming home or not be too far from home, yes? So it says 2400 is this line, yes, and 2700's on the side, so what's in between that? So it would be like 3, so 1.5 would be here in the middle, so that's 2500. So yeah, I'm probably getting about 2500 milliamp, maybe a little bit more than that, 2500 milliamps out of this cell if I'm landing at 3 volts constant, remember under load, because the cell's always gonna bounce back once you stop pulling drain on it, okay? So this is rated at 2800, I believe. I'm really only getting about 2400 on this, okay? Something to keep in mind, if I'm flying a little bit faster and harder at 30 amps, yes, I'm gonna get under 2400 milliamps out of that. You see this yellow line right here? So if I'm trying to be extra cautious and I know that if I fly at 30 amps with these, yes, I'm only gonna get just short of 2400 milliamps. So this is important because when you're flying, you should be paying attention to how many amps you're constantly pulling. This will tell you I'm flying with the wind, I'm flying into the wind. I'm constantly flying at this rate. I might need to adjust the numbers that I have in my head for the total capacity as you're mid-flight if you didn't already pre-plan that, okay? So let's hop back, let's take a look and see if this is any different with the P28s, okay? Slightly, it only pulls 35 amp is what it's rated at, and let's see here, so what do we get here? So this one has a much smoother discharge curve here too. If you notice this, right, it's just very long and linear, and then it drops off. Let's go back just so you can compare this, the two right here. Yeah, where you can see this one, right, it kind of goes down here and then it shelves off really hard, especially after the 3.5 mark, it really starts to fall down. Yeah, so maybe, I mean, obviously for the price, the P20As seem to be a little more consistent all the way across, okay? So, but if we're gonna say 20 amps with this one, the black line, yeah, and I'm gonna start to pull back in right around 3 volts here, yeah, I'll get about 2400. So it's kind of about the same. If I'm doing the 30 amp and I'm flying fast and hard, by the time I get to 3 volts, I'm only gonna get 2100. Okay, so it kind of just depends. I'm probably gonna pull more amps if I'm flying a 2P. Right, now let's look at some of the 21700s here. So we're gonna do the same thing. We'll come up to the 21700s. Yeah, we'll take the discharge current here and we'll put it up to 30 and we'll see what there is, not too many. So you got the P42s, 4200 milliamps, 45 amp output for 485, that's a good number. You've got the Samsung 30Ts, yes, 21700, 3000 milliamps, 35 amps for $7. Or you can get these ones over here, which have more capacity and the same output for less, the 40Ts. Yes, and then what else do we have here? The P45B, 4500 milliamps, 45 amp hour battery. So these are the same, you get just an extra 300 milliamps for an extra $3.30. You might need to check the discharge curve. But if we look at these, P42As, solid, yeah, highly recommend, 10 out of 10. Okay, so once again, if we come over here, all right, we got our discharge rate characteristics. We'll zoom in here just a little bit. Yes, if I'm going to be pulling 20 amps constant here, what do we get? Right around the 3.0 mark, you're going to get a little over 3,600, somewhere between 3,600 and 4,000. So let's just say you're getting 3,800 on the high side. Okay, milliamps. If we look at the 30 amp discharge, boom, you're going to be over here and just short of 3,600, 3,500 milliamps, okay? So that's important to remember or keep in mind, because remember, that's if you just happen to be flying a 1P, a 4S 1P or 4S or 6S 1P, yeah? If you're flying 2 in parallel or you have a dedicated 2P pack, remember, you're sharing that load now, okay? So now if we're taking this, and I'm saying I'm flying a 2P, yes, P42A, yes, I can discharge at 30 amps, but really I'm sharing it between these two. So if I'm flying and the spec sheet or my goggle display says that I'm flying at 30 amps constant, that is shared between the two cells you have in parallel. So really I'm only pulling off of the pack at 15 amps each. Does that make sense? That's something to keep in mind. So now if we look at this, let's say somewhere between the blue and the black, yeah, let's just say the blue on the high side, I'm really only pulling at 15 amps constant between, because it's a 2 in parallel. That means I should be getting closer to 4,000. So I'm getting maybe 38 or 3,900. So I'm getting more milliamps out of this pack, more watt hours. We're gonna talk about that in just a second. So this is how to read this. And it's important to, you know, I put little labels on my batteries for here, right? I say when I made the battery, okay, what kind of cell is it? It's a 6S2P, it's 9 amp hours, which I usually say, I don't say 10,000 milliamps. Okay, I just say 10 amp hours, it's easier. I put what the amp draw is so I can remind myself, yes, and what the watt hours are too. So how do we calculate what watt hours are? So watt hours is a simple formula. It's not really talked a lot about when it comes to like flying FPV, but when it comes to e-bikes or an electric skateboard, it's something you might want to track. Why? Because it tells you how much actual energy or gas is in the tank. So I know that when I ride my electric skateboard that has air tires on it, that it consumes about 40 watt hours per mile. So I know that when I have a 12S6P battery that has this many watt hours, you do the math, I got about this much range on my electric skateboard. So maybe you can use that to determine how much range you're actually going to get out of your packs. Okay, so watt hours, yes, is the nominal voltage times the amp hours, okay? And that's just for the single cell. So let's just say we have a single cell, it's 3.6 volts nominally, yeah, times 4 amp hours or 4,000 milliamps, but you want to just put the amp hour times 4, means that a single cell has 14.4 watt hours, okay? Multiply that by 4, and for a 4P pack right here, you've got 57.6 watt hours, okay? Same thing, if you take that back and you go 3.6 times 4 equals 14.4, and you have a 6-cell battery, you're gonna have 86.4 watt hours, yeah? Or you could do the math any way you want. 3.6 times 6 cells in series equals a nominal voltage of 21.6, yes? And then you're gonna multiply that by a 4 amp hour battery. It means you should have 86.4 watt hours. Now keep in mind, this is if you take the battery from full all the way down to like 2.8 or 2.5, okay? So it's gonna be less because if you wanna play it safe and you want your batteries to live and last longer, yeah, you'll probably land around 3 volts, which is a good safe number, okay? Good. So let's try and reverse engineer all of this to see if we can actually figure out how far we're gonna be able to fly round trip. So this is gonna be a hypothetical with this one. So I've got my Molicell P42, 45 amp output, right? It's rated at 4.2 amp hours if I discharge at like 10 amps, which is way too low. Okay, so if I look at the chart here though, I know that if I fly with this, and I do an average of 20 amps constantly on the drone, right, that I'm gonna get about 3,700 milliamps out of this, okay? So instead, we're gonna do 21.6, okay? We're gonna multiply that by, what did I say, 3,700, so 3.7, okay, which means I should have 79.92 watt hours that is usable for me, is usable, right? Because it's rated at like 88 if I could use it from top to bottom, but like 79.9, so we'll just say 80, okay? And let's just say that I know that I flew 5 miles on my last flight and it took all of that. Like I said, it's hypothetical. So 80 divided by 5 means it takes about 16 watt hours per mile when I'm flying my drone under those same conditions. That's important because then if I use a different pack that's around a different capacity like this one, I can gauge how far I can fly around trip. So how about a real experience, okay? So if we take this 2P, okay, and this is actually a slightly different cell. It's the Molicell P45B. This is a 6S2P, and it has 9 amp hours of capacity and can do 90 amps. But because it's a 2P, if I'm flying right around, I'm gonna say I fly around 30 amps constantly, that's actually shared, so it's really only pulling 15 amps per cell, which gives me much more capacity out of this. So the number for that, so if we look at the discharge chart, you can see here that if I'm flying around 40 amps constant, but that is shared because it's a 2P pack, I'm really pulling about 20 amps constant, so I should be able to get about 4,000 milliamps per cell, which would mean 8 amp hours or 8,000 milliamps total out of this actual pack right here, okay? So if we do the math on that, and we're just gonna store this number, 21.6 times 8, means I've really got 172.8 watt hours of actual usable energy out of this pack, okay? So now we're gonna start to reverse engineer some stuff. So here's where it gets interesting, and then we're gonna wrap up. So I know on a recent flight with this pack, I was able to fly 8.5 miles, yes, and I consumed right around 6,000 milliamps or 6 amp hours. So if we do the math on that, 21.6 nominal cell voltage, yes, times 6 amp hours, means I consumed 129.6, okay, watt hours during that flight, yeah? And if I know that I flew 8.5 miles and you divide that, you get a number of 15.24. So it takes about 15.24 watt hours for me to fly a mile with this pack right here. Okay, so now if we jump back to the total pack capacity under load at 20 amps constant per cell or 40 amps constant total, right? We can reverse engineer that here. Okay, so it's 172.8 watt hours is how many I can actually use out of this down to 3 volts. Yeah, and we divide that by 15.24, okay? That means I should be able to fly 11.3 miles round trip with this pack. That's a lot, 11.3 miles, okay? And let's go further, let's convert that to kilometers, okay, which is usually like 1.6. So 11.33 times 1.6, if you're on metric, means I should be able to fly just over 18 kilometers total. So that's a lot, that's pretty nerdy, and the only way to know this is to constantly track it, write your numbers down, put it into a spreadsheet, and see where the numbers lie so that you can become more confident and comfortable with your different flying. Yes, for me, it's wintertime, it's crappy out, out. I don't want to be outside, but now is the best time for me to go fly because the air is cold, the gusts are higher. I want to go fly the Swiss Alps one day and like dive mountains. And am I going to be able to make it out and back? So I want to test it and see where the numbers lie in the worst conditions. That way, if I ever show up and it's super crappy and the winds are at 30 or 40 miles per hour, I know my actual range is going to be without falling into the sky and hoping to go do a drone recovery. So I know that was long-winded, but I feel like that was packed full of tons of technical information and data. So if you found that helpful, drop a comment below, hit the like button, and if you're new, hit subscribe. It always helps the channel grow. If you have any additional questions, drop those below, and I'll see you all in another video.